So is Labour planning on throwing its weight behind this idea by the Lib Dems and the SNP to have an election on the 9th of December?
Oh, I mean, this Lib Dem plan is a sort of opportunistic stunt, I'm afraid. I mean, it's entirely sort of ridiculous. It would need cross-party support to get through the House of Commons procedures, and then it'll be subject to all kinds of amendments, particularly when it gets into the House of Lords. It's just a stunt so the Lib Dems can get on the telly today. No, look. We're in this situation discussing whether or not we should have an election because Boris Johnson has utterly failed on his signature policy to deliver Brexit do or die on October 31st, and the Labour Party's position remains its principled position. We want a general election, but we're not going to go for a general election until we have got an absolute reassurance that a no-deal Brexit is ruled out, and we've got an understanding from the European Commission about the extension date, and we're still waiting for that clarification from the EU.
Interesting that you say that it's a stunt by the Lib Dems. Nicky Morgan says it's a stunt by the Lib Dems. Something I didn't expect to do on this morning's programme is unite two of those guests on this matter. Now, on the subject of an election, Jeremy Corbyn has called for an election 35 times. He told me 2 weeks ago, we're ready for an election any time, we want to go out and campaign. Last month, John McDonnell told the show, general election, bring it on. So can you just explain why, if an extension is granted by the EU to the end of January, why doesn't Labour want to see an election?
Well, we're still waiting for that clarification, and we don't have it yet. So when we get that clarification...
say that their plan won't go through until it happens.
Well, I mean, the Lib Dems isn't... The Lib Dem plan would depend on the government and others allowing it to go in the order paper. It's not going to happen. It's just a sort of sideshow. It's a distraction. We're waiting for the clarification from the EU about the extension date because we don't trust Boris Johnson. We don't trust him to not crash us out with a damaging no-deal Brexit. So that is why we're adopting a principled, responsible position, waiting to see what happens in the next 24, 48 hours. But yes, we do want a general election. I mean, when you've got 4.5 million people waiting for treatment in the NHS, then we want an election. When you've got over 600,000 people in the last year languishing on trolleys in corridors in hospitals, we want a general election. When we've got our young people denied the mental health support that they need, of course we want a general election, but we've got to make sure that we get those absolute reassurances that Boris Johnson won't use a general election and the campaign to crash us out of the European Union with a disastrous no-deal Brexit.
Well, this is the point, isn't it? I mean, you've just said it. You know, with every day that you delay backing an election is another day where, in your words, you know, the NHS is in crisis. So let me just try and phrase the question slightly differently. If the EU does grant an extension until the end of January, which is not a wild hypothetical, it's what's expected, will Labour then back an early election?
Well, I mean, you've put the finger on the dilemma that faces me as the Shadow Health Secretary. Every day that Matt Hancock is the Health Secretary, another 300 people wait beyond 18 weeks for treatment in the health service. That's people waiting longer, in pain, in agony, in distress, under Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson, because they've been running down the NHS for a decade. So look, I do want that general election because I want to start rebuilding the NHS, but we have to wait and see what the European Union clarify about an extension date. And if they give us that extension until January, then we'll have to consider it. But at the moment, we don't have that clarification, and we cannot support Boris Johnson's plans until we've got an absolute reassurance that no deal is off the table.
You see, I don't really want to sound like a broken record here, but it's one thing to say, oh, yeah, we'll consider it when the EU come back. But we're expecting them to come back in a matter of days. We're expecting them to come back potentially with this extension to the end of January. So why can't you just be straight with people about whether or not you back an election at that time? If the EU extends to the end of January, will Labour back an election?
But there's lots of speculation that the EU are going to come back with various different dates, and that's the issue. So until we know the exact date they come back with, then we'll be able to make our judgment. But I want to reassure you, we are desperate for a general election. When you've got 32,000 people waiting beyond 2 months for cancer treatment, and every cancer target has worsened in the last year under Matt Hancock and now Boris Johnson, we need that general election. But we are not going to countenance an election while no deal is still a possibility. We've got to get an absolute reassurance that no deal is completely off the table, and that is what we're waiting for.
Is it truth that you are stalling about the general election simply because you don't trust people to vote the way that you want? You don't think that you would win it?
No, not at all. Look, I'm confident that once we start making the argument about the future of the National Health Service, the future of living standards, about climate change, about the future of our schools, which are being cut under these Tories, then we'll begin to win the confidence of the British people, because this country needs a change of direction. And I know you'll say to me, look at the opinion polls, they're terrible. And they're not great for the Labour Party. I'm not daft, I can see that. But they weren't that great in the last general election, and we made up a lot of ground. So I think when we go out there and we talk about our vision for the country, about rebuilding our NHS and giving every child the best education in our schools, I think we'll be able to win people over to our programme.
You see, I know that you want to talk about all these domestic issues, and I'm very happy to talk about all of Labour's domestic issues in an election campaign when, they'll be on your manifesto. But can you see why some people are frustrated that you just don't seem to be able to get an answer from Labour about whether or not they support a December election or not? Is it because there's a split in the party? What's going on?
No, I don't know. I mean, there's obviously different opinions in the Labour Party about the tactics of an election. I mean, you can read that in today's newspapers. I can't pretend there's not different opinions. But look, the priority for us is to get a general election where no deal is off the table. And we want that general election so we can focus on the NHS and schools and making our streets safer after the years of cuts to police officers under these Tories. But we're not going to walk into a trap of Boris Johnson's, who's trying to distract everybody, because remember, he hasn't delivered on his pledge, his solemn pledge to the British people, that he'd deliver Brexit, do or die, by October 31st. And now he's sort of withdrawn the withdrawal bill, and he's even talking about going on strike. I mean, when you've got 600,000 people languishing on trolleys, in corridors, in hospitals, not even able to get a bed, and this government are talking about going on strike when so many people are denied treatment. I mean, it's a joke. It's disgusting, actually.
I'm keen to talk about the really serious news that's come out this week as well, about the 39 people found dead in the back of a refrigerated trailer attached to a lorry this week. We don't know the circumstances of their deaths. We don't know what drew them to make that awful decision to get into the back of that container. But we do know that this is the kind of thing that is happening in the United Kingdom. Are you worried that MPs are just taking their eye off the ball when it comes to stuff like this, really, really serious issues, because we're having all these rows about Brexit?
I mean, what's happened with that container is just unspeakably horrific, isn't it? And I mean, the story that was on the front page of many of the newspapers yesterday about the young woman texting her mother saying, "I can't breathe." I mean, it's heartbreaking, wasn't it? And the fact that people must be so desperate to climb into a container to travel across the world to get to this country is heartrending. And this human trafficking that is going on is immoral, and we need to ensure that the authorities, the police and others have got the resources. And you're right, these issues should be getting debated properly in the House of Commons. I mean, this week in the House of Commons, I brought a motion to end privatisation in our NHS. I mean, Lib Dems, by the way, abstained on it. I can't understand why they abstained on it, but they did. But these issues aren't getting the focus that they should get. When you've got so many people on the waiting list, 4.5 million on the waiting list in our NHS, it's not getting the focus in the House of Commons that it should get at the moment. So yes, I do share your frustration that there are so many big, important issues which really need the focus of government, and they're not getting them, which is why, again, I come back to it, it's utterly offensive that the government are talking about going on strike when there's so many big issues facing the country.